To create an LOD for this sprout, we'll go to the LOD selector next to our sprout graph. We can click the plus button here to see a drop-down with our LOD options. We can add an imposter, which we'll discuss later, or we can add a new LOD. A new tab has been spawned, and a new item has been added to the selector. This new LOD graph is a duplicate of the LOD0 graph with all the standard functionality of Sprout. All of the modules and their inputs have been copied and can now be edited. After changing an input, a new Reset to LOD button appears. This allows us to revert any changed inputs back to their value on their LOD source. Also, if we edit the source graph, any inputs that aren't overridden in our new LOD will inherit the changes. Let's make some edits to the new graph. We'll override inputs like the standard mesh generator's loop density and LOD index on available mesh sources. We can also add the Simplify module to the mesh edit stage for many of our nodes. For leaves, we can simply clear out the mesh data that was generated for a percentage of the leaves. We can switch between LODs using the Graph tabs, the LOD selector, or the LOD menu in the Viewport toolbar. You'll notice the stats updating accordingly. We could continue reducing the mesh, but instead we'll add a new LOD. We'll do this the same way as before. Notice that LOD0 will still be used as the source. Instead, we might prefer to start from the changes we've already made in LOD1. We'll delete the LOD we just added, right-click on LOD1 in the LOD selector, and choose Duplicate. There are some additional options available in the LOD selector context menu. Besides delete and duplicate, we can reset, which will reset all input and module changes back to their source values. And we can set our LOD to mesh edits only. When selected, you'll notice an info message appears in the stack, and that we now have access to the mesh execution stages only. When set to mesh edits only, we can't change the structure of our sprout, its elements, only the mesh representation. We might do this to prevent the sprout from changing too much visually between LODs. Also, when generating pivot painter info for sprouts with LODs, we merge elements from all LODs into the same texture. Instead, in mesh edits only mode, pivot painter data from the source LOD is reused since our hierarchy information hasn't changed. This can be important for meshes with large numbers of elements, since there's a limit to the number of elements pivot painter can process. Now let's create an imposter LOD. We select Add Imposter from the drop-down and notice that our new graph has one node with one module. The default imposter generator captures an 8-card billboard of the LOD at source index. We can also set the tolerance between the capture image and the sprout bounds. Users are free to create their own imposter generator modules. Now when we press regenerate, if we don't have an output directory set up on the sprout actor, we'll be prompted for a save location. This is where the captured textures and materials will be saved. Before we create a mesh from this sprout, we can configure default LOD screen sizes through the Sprout Data tab of the Sprout stack. Now we're ready to make a static mesh asset. We'll click Create Static Mesh and check Include LODs. Then we'll run the mesh creation. When we open the static mesh editor, we'll see our asset and all of its LODs.